Hey, cosmic people, welcome back to the show. Do you ever get a feeling where you want to bite your nails? I have this all the time, and usually it's to do with anxiety and stress. And we all go through this. Obviously, I bite my nails. If you're stressed, there may be other things that you do. But we're going to be talking today about how can you deal with this. So we got on the show Trixi Menhardt, and she is the founder of Red Pants Coaching. So she is a coach and she's going to be talking about this system that she calls PQ reps. She's going to be talking about what that is, and she's going to be talking about her own journey, because before she was a PQ coach, she actually had this really bad horse riding accident. Horse riding is one of her favorite things in the world, but she nearly died on a horse. And then because of that, she had this terrible fear of getting on a horse, but she wanted to get on horses. She loved horses. It was a huge part of her life. And she needed to tackle this fear. So she did it through this system of PQ reps. And she's going to be running through what those PQ reps are. And yeah, before we do hear from Trixi, just to let you know, Trixi was not able to join with video today. So if you're on YouTube, this is just going to be an audio. So let's get into it and let's hear from Trixi. All right, Trixi, welcome to the show. I know you've lived all over the world, which we're going to be discussing today, but where are you today?
Right now I'm back home in Florida. I live on what's called the Space Coast, so kind of like Central Florida on the Atlantic Ocean.
Sounds very nice. It's been cold and wet and windy over in the UK, so that sounds nice over in Florida. But let's get into it. So obviously, I know we're going to come towards the end of the podcast about what you're doing at the moment in terms of like coaching, emotional intelligence. But I wanted to take a step back to the start of your life. You wrote some really interesting notes for the show, and talking about you had what could be seen as very privileged upbringing over in Vienna. And people on the outside will probably think, oh, she's got this, perfect life, but like beneath the scenes, things weren't what they seemed. So I'm wondering if you could, run us through kind of your early years to start with.
Yeah. Of course, when I was in it, I didn't realize what was going on. But now I can see that my family was quite dysfunctional. Like I would assume most families are dysfunctional, so I'm not thinking it's anything in particular. But the way it affected me was that my brother, although he was 7 years older than me, was really my rock. And he and I were soulmates and kind of like navigated the craziness around us. And then another big person in my life was my grandfather and my grandmother, who I would spend, summers with or Sunday afternoons. And there was just fun and games, literally. We played cards and we baked cookies, and it was just sort of the happy part of my life. And I guess when you asked me about what were some of the challenges in my life, that was the earliest one I remember. First my grandfather dying, but I guess, that is kind of to be expected. But the real big deal was when my brother left. He was 19 and I was about 12. And at that point, it was like the rug had been pulled from under me. That person that I could rely on in my crazy family left. And I never said anything. And years later, we talked about it. And like, I have no idea that I was so important to you. So I guess what I know now about my childhood is that, I was very privileged, and I was really, really lucky that I had good friends who had horses and who allowed me to spend time with them. And just sort of that, how it shapes yourself. For me, I'm more, even though I can talk a lot, I think I'm an emotional introvert. And that probably comes from that time where I needed to just stay back from the stuff that was going on with my parents and my sister.
Yeah, so obviously you mentioned some of the people who I guess are positive influences for you, like your brother, even though I guess there's two sides to that. He obviously sounds when he was around, it was amazing, but him leaving, obviously that was a very difficult moment for you. But what was some of more of like the dark stuff that was going on within your household?
Yeah, so my parents never had a good marriage. And my mom and my older sister, I just remember them sitting at the dining table. We had a big formal dining room. And after dinner, they would just sit there and drink and smoke and catastrophize about the world. And if there wasn't anything real going on, then they would get into other people's business. And again, that shaped me as a person, that I don't like to gossip. I'm a very lighthearted person. To some extent, people will fault me at that and say, you got to be more serious or nothing sticks to you. But I'm sure that came from that experience where I thought, I don't know, the world isn't that bad. What are they talking about? But I could see how they were drowning themselves in some imagined sorrow.
So actually, because you said you don't like gossip, so it was almost seeing your sister and your mother gossip. You were like, hey, actually, I don't want to be like that. I don't think that's very constructive.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and then at some point as I grew older, of course, they started to include me in their catastrophizing. And I remember my sister telling me, you're going to grow up one day and you're going to realize how bad the world really is. Like, I refuse to look at it that way, but yeah.
And your sister, how old was she when she started drinking?
Wow, as long as I can remember. So probably 15, 16.
So I was just going to ask, why do you think, you've obviously, you went on a different path and you said you didn't want to gossip, you didn't want to drink, you didn't want to do these things. So why do you think, obviously, you chose a different path?
It's a good question, right? We all grew up in the same environment, yet I think my friend environment was different. So my best friend growing up, I met her when I was 3 years old, and we were at the playground in the park. Her family was very outdoorsy. That was the family that had the horses, and I got to spend most of my summers with them. And then later on, I had a friend in high school who was also more into, I guess in her case, she was more of an intellectual. I remember one time, I don't know, we were 16 or 17, and I stayed at her house for a Saturday night sleepover. And it was really interesting because my sister was convinced that there was an orgy happening at that house. And what we actually did was we found a bottle of champagne, and we took it out on the balcony, and we did the thing, we shook it, and we had the cork pop off, and we just had so much fun together. We didn't even drink the champagne. We thought it was just hilarious to play with it, and then went back inside and watched a movie. So I think it was my friend environment that was different.
Yeah, that's a great point. As obviously the environment you live in at home is very important, but also your friend environment is important as well.
Yeah. And then later, when I was like in my early 20s, I was part of this friend group that was a little bit crazy. I always said we tried to kill ourselves so many different ways by doing crazy stuff. We would go mountain biking before there were mountain bikes. So we would ride down the hillside on a street bike. And I remember many times going over the handlebars. We took inflatable boats up a snowy hillside and rode them down without any control of stopping them. And one by one, we would fall out of the boat, and we thought that was hilarious. So I think it was, again, that focus on outdoor and good fun that was different in my social circle.
So yeah, I heard you say you were very adventurous. You're mountain biking, like doing a lot of other stuff. So were you still living at home at this point? Like, what was your situation?
No, I had moved out. I was living by myself. Yeah, I was going to university. I was living, again, I was living in one of my dad's apartments. So um, he was very supportive. And I was living by myself.
I then saw. I think you moved to Spain as well. What age were you when you did that?
So I didn't really move there, but I spent a lot of time there. I was learning Spanish in university. I was doing an international business degree. And so that was one of my chosen languages. And I met a great friend in Spain, in Barcelona, and I would go and spend summers with her. So I think it was probably like in my early 20s, yeah, 2021 when I started going there. And she was doing an MBA in Barcelona, and she lived in student housing. So again, for me, that was a really interesting experience to be with a group of international students. Even though I did an international degree in Vienna, most of the students there were from Austria. Back in the days, we didn't mix up that much. So that was my first time to really hanging out with people from all over the world, and also experiencing living in a different place and in a different language. German is my mother tongue. I English was just my second language then.
And then at some point, you met your husband as well. When did that happen?
Yeah, my husband's father was my father's good friend from high school. So they had gone to school together and they'd kept in touch, but then my husband's family lived all over Europe, whereas, we were in Vienna. So I did know him for a long time, but then again, I didn't know him. So we met as adults, and um, we both had this idea of living abroad. He had studied abroad. He had lived, well, abroad at the time in northern Germany. Remember, that was before there was an EU and you couldn't really move around that freely. So then for some time we thought about going to Spain together. He had family there. He had some job opportunities, and that didn't pan out, thankfully. And then he got an opportunity to go to Toronto, Canada. And at that point, I was maybe, I don't know, 3-4 years into my post-university career. I was working as a product manager. I really loved my work. But at the same time, I was so excited about moving away. So we did move to Canada together.
And then it was because I know one of the things I read about as well is obviously like having children, had a big impact on your life, because you kind of got to this crossroads where it was, I think you mentioned you were like a bit of a workaholic, and I can continue to be a workaholic, but obviously that's going to have a negative effect on raising a family as well. So when was it? When was it in your life that you had children? Was that while you were still in Canada, or?
Yeah, I was still in Canada, and I didn't have the mother gene. I would have been happy not to have children, and it was my husband who was really interested in raising a family. And so I said, well, that's okay. Let's just have one child, and I need you to be a real father. Like, this is not going to be on me. And then, as it happens in life, it's always unexpected. So then my son was born, and I just took one look at him, and I fell so deeply in love with this little person that I never looked back. And going back to my career, I was then, Canada has very liberal maternity policy. So I took 6 months off, which was great. And then I went back to work 4 days a week. I had a female boss who was very understanding about that. And I think that set me off on that path of I can have a meaningful career and at the same time not work 60 or 70 hours a week. So I was able to have that balance early on. But I would say for the longest time, I was still very, very invested in my career. My daughter was born 5 years later. And again, at that point, I had a very, I would say not challenging, but time consuming and travel intense job. I was always in sales and business development. I had to go and see my customers, had to go to trade shows, that kind of thing. But I was always able to balance work life at that point. I never felt overwhelmed by my work, but I did have nannies and my kids would go to daycare. So early on, I think that was a good thing for me to figure out. And I have to say, my husband at the time was very supportive. When my son was little, we had this paper calendar. Again, this was before the internet. And we would put sticky notes on the paper calendar. Those were the days or the weeks that we claimed to travel because one parent always had to be at home. And at some point I realized, oh, I just put on my sticky note on a random week and then I can barter this as needed. But overall, I think we did manage well as parents.
So you mentioned really interesting terminology I'd not read before, where you say there's the unholy trifecta of overwhelm, and you mentioned this both in terms of yourself before your divorce, but then also with a lot of your clients now, of like being a bad mother, a bad spouse, bad daughter, etc. Always thinking about that, and obviously the relationship between that and your work. So tell us about your own journey with that, and like what is this unholy trifecta that you're talking about?
Well, it means that I was never present with what I was doing. So when I was at work, I would think about what are my kids doing? If it was like 2 o'clock, I know the nanny was picking them up from school and I was at work. And then vice versa. When I was at home, I kept thinking, what are the things I haven't done? And I think early on, I did recognize that and I tried to counteract it, like being in the car with my kids and being present versus, on to the next thing. But it was hard. And I think what I mean by the unholy trifecta is that I just never felt good enough. There was always one or multiple areas in my life where I was falling short in my own opinion. Well, later on, I realized that I had completely unrealistic expectations of myself. But I chose to be a working mother. I loved my work. And I chose to be engaged in, friends and a social life. I wanted to look good for my spouse. I also always had a horse, so that took time off. I wanted my home to be perfect. So I think at any given time, I had 20 open projects, and that really made me nervous. And I never felt good about myself. Maybe if somebody, gave me kudos and said, wow, you look really good today, or oh my God, that was a fun party, but it was very short-lived. It was on to the next thing, on to the next thing, and I recognize that in my clients. There is definite difference between men and women, and I remember one of my coworkers once mentioning, I have no idea how you do this. He had a stay-at-home wife with 3 children, and he looked at me and said, I have no idea how you do this all. And I just shrugged it off. I said, well, I just do it.
Yeah, it's. I think it's a very interesting point, especially with the way Western society is at the moment, and potentially a controversial point I'm about to raise with a lot of the audience. But I think I feel like in modern society we're almost teaching people that work is more important than parenting, and for me, obviously, like being a parent is the most important job that you have. And I think sometimes people look down on, like a stay-at-home mum, or it can be on the opposite side. You could be a stay-at-home dad, right? And a woman is out being the breadwinner. But I think the fact that we're seeing, every single person needs to have some type of career, right? And if you don't, you're backward and you live in the dark ages. And I don't think it's true. If people, like you said, raising like 3 children, that's like it's like an 80-hour job or full-time job over full-time job in itself. And I feel like in Western society we are diminishing the importance of parenthood, and people going back to work potentially too soon to focus on their careers. And I even look at some of my friends, I'm 35, I haven't had children yet, but a lot of my friends, when they turned 30, started having children. And I know a lot of my friends, their wives are going on maternity leave. We've got good maternity now in the UK. And then within 3 months they had a high flying career, and they're already feeling guilty even though they've got this maternity leave about like not going back to work. And I just think that tells me that something is wrong with society if someone after 3 months feels guilty about like being a mother. For me, I just think that's wrong. But yeah, as I said, I feel like this shouldn't be a controversial point, but some people will think it is. But yeah, it'd be good to kind of hear your view and everything I've just said.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really good point. Definitely. And I see that the generation, like your generation that is about to have children now, I see them differently than my generation. I think we were more on the forefront. Even though a lot of my friends worked, at some point they did stop working, and I was often the single woman in a meeting room. Like I always say, I was the token woman. And I see that has changed, that now maybe because of economic impact, or maybe there's more equality. I see that your generation, there's more couples where both of them are working. I was more the odd person out. I had chosen that kind of life. I was living in this cute little suburb in Northern California, and um, was kind of oblivious to what other mothers were doing because I was so busy. But one time, my good friend took me aside and said, "Do you know you're the only working mother in the school?" And I said, "What?" and, and that has definitely changed. If you go to the same school today, most mothers there are working. And what I see in my clients is, as you said, the feeling guilty. And that goes back to the unholy trifecta. You feel guilty about everything. You're not a good enough worker. You are not a good enough mother. I remember one time, this was during COVID, I was coaching a young woman. Actually, her manager had sent her to me because he was so worried about her getting burnout. And they had a young child and were at home due to COVID. And her and her husband had split it. So she was working the first part of the day and he was working the second part of the day. And she was terrified when somebody booked a meeting for the afternoon and she couldn't show up and she would have to confess to her male coworkers that she had no childcare. That was a very, very profound experience for me as a coach to understand the depth of guilt and fear working mothers have.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned you had like a bit of a turning point in your relationship, in terms of that balance you're talking about between being a mother and being like a successful person in business. And you said you were like offered a promotion, but it was kind of the first time in your life where you were like, no, actually, I'm not going to take this job because I'm going to be on an airplane all the time. But yeah, I wonder if you could like run us through that decision and why you decided to take it.
I would say up until that point, I was more like in middle management. I was managing a team, but I wasn't like really up climbing the ladder. And that was the opportunity to take a job that was fascinating. It was international mergers and acquisitions. And I would have loved to do that. But somehow I had the clarity of mind to say, well, if I had no children, no question I would do that. It just wasn't doable. At the time, my husband had a very challenging career. We were actually living in India at the time. And I always joked, like, why did they move us as a family, as an expat family? Because he spent so much time on the road that we were mostly home alone in India. And that was the time when I was offered that job. And I just had the clarity that somebody had to be around for the children. And I wanted to be around. And of course, later on in life, I realized that those are the crucial decisions you make. So once you take that step back, it's really hard to recover from it career wise. But it was the right thing for me. And it was an opportunity to also decide what do I want to do with the rest of my life. And that's how I ended up becoming a coach. But going back to making that decision, there was no doubt. It was absolutely clear that one parent has to be at home, and that was going to be me.
Yeah, and it also sounds like a story of sacrifice as well, which is a big part of being a parent, obviously. And I think nowadays it annoys me where some people say, they don't want to have children for like very selfish reasons because I'm not going to be able to travel the world. I'm not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. I'm not going to be able to focus on my career, right? But that is part of being a parent. It's that sacrifice, right? And we all have to make sacrifices in our life. So obviously, as you said, it maybe had a negative effect on your career in terms of climbing the corporate ladder. Obviously, that's a sacrifice you've given to your children that like even though they're maybe not conscious of it, right? But that's going to have a positive impact on them for forever. And then, the next generation and the next generation. So for me, that's really what parenting is about.
Yeah, and I was lucky that I did have role models. So one of my dad's best friends, she was a lawyer and she worked at a bank. Of course, I was back in Austria, and her and her husband were co-parenting. So they both had corporate careers, but they both took it a little bit slower. So neither of them like made it to the top, yet they raised a child together. And I think in those days, I mean, I grew up in the 60s and 70s. That was very unusual to see that.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So, all right, well let's start getting into a little bit of in terms of what you're doing now, but not talking about your actual work, talking a little bit more around like emotional intelligence coaching. So I know there was a couple of big challenges that you had, and one of them was that you had like a big horse riding accident. So yeah, I was wondering if you could one, talk us through the horse riding accident, and then two, like, how did PQ help you with that?
Yes. So I I'm an avid trail rider, and people always say, "Oh, trail riding." No, trail riding means you take this 1,000-pound animal out on the road and don't know what's going to happen. So what happened in that case was that I was riding with my good friend, and we were up in the Bay Area near Oakland, riding on a trail, and it was winter time, and we have really wet winters in California, and the trail was washed out, and my friend was in front with her little horse that was like a mountain goat, and there was this turn in the trail where basically there was no footing. But I didn't pay attention because I just followed the other horse. And because my mind followed the other horse, my horse followed it and lost its footing. And we started rolling down this hillside. And it was barren except for poison oak. So for the people who live on the West Coast, poison oak it's really, really nasty. I mean, it gives you a rash all over the body. And in the wintertime, it's just bare strings. So we kept sliding down. And I mean, the good part of the accident was that my horse stayed with me. Like, she never panicked. She was kind of on top of me. I was buried under her. And I couldn't get my hands out of the reins. So, like my elbow was stuck in the reins. So every time I tried to separate myself from her, we kept sliding down some more. Eventually, I was able to get my arm out, and I literally just pushed her down away from me. And there was this little tree that I could hold on to. And I told her, go, just. And so she got up and she ran up the hillside. And you can imagine my friend was up there. I'm like, oh my God, where are you? What's happening? And somehow I made it up that hillside. I don't know what, but it was very scary. Luckily, neither of us were seriously hurt. I lost the skin on most of my fingers. That was pretty painful, but treatable. I got back in the saddle. We rode to my friend's horse. I went in a cold shower, soaked myself off. That's the thing you do to not get rash all over your body. But of course, in hindsight, it was scary. I could have died on that hillside. And ever since, I couldn't go on what I call a single track with a deep drop off on one side. Now, when you trail ride, those are the best trails because they take you deep into the forest, into remote areas. You don't want to stay on a gravel road. And so my friends, they were very accommodating. They understood that this was not up for discussion. And once in a while, I would find myself on a trail like that, and I would just jump off the horse, which was really stupid because, that's more dangerous than riding it, but I could not handle it. And then, and then I started PQ, which was initially the organization Shirzad Shamin was offering a grant to coaches. So you got free access to the initial 6 weeks of the program. And I was like 3 or 4 weeks into the mental fitness app, and I found myself on top of a trail like that. My friend was very apologetic, and she said, "Oh, no, no, no. Oh, my God, I'm so sorry. I know you can't handle this. Let's turn around." And I said, "No, let's do it." And then the whole way down, I did what we call the PQ reps. And PQ reps is basically you stop thinking and you focus on one sensation. So you look at something, you touch something, you hear something. And I started at the top of the ears of my horse, and I slowly worked my way back her body and, felt the weight of my body in my seat, the weight of my feet in the stirrups. At some point, I switched to listening to the birds and the nature. And at the end of the trail, I was cured. It was fascinating.
And yeah, I can speak to the power of the PQ reps as well, as I've done some of Trixi's work and PQ reps because Lawrence, my colleague, he's the one who introduced me to Trixi. He's been working with Trixi for a long time, and through that I started doing some of these PQ reps, and it's very powerful. And my story's not quite as interesting or damaging on my body as falling off a horse, but I had been biting my nails for a long time, right? And my partner Anna, she was always like, stop biting your nails, stop biting my nails. I wanted to do it, but obviously it's something I do totally unconsciously. It's often something I do when I'm working, right? Because I'm anxious, and I notice and she noticed when we go on holiday, it was like my nails would grow because I was so relaxed, right? I'm on the beach, and then suddenly we're back in London for 3 days, and I'm like biting my nails. And actually, what I do, obviously, you mentioned, which sounds great, like actually touching the horse, feeding the horse. You can also do it with your own body. So, like rubbing your fingertips together. So that's what really helped me. And it was interesting because obviously the fingertip is near the nail, and yeah, I still occasionally bite my nails. They're not perfect, but they're so much better than they used to be. And I think, yeah, doing those PQ reps was a very powerful thing for me. And yeah, Trixie, we'll put some information in the show notes about like PQ. Obviously, we're going to go into a little bit now in terms of what you're doing with coaching and PQ. But what are like for people that know nothing about PQ, like what are some like good resources that we can include in the show notes for them?
I would say link to the Positive Intelligence website. There is plenty of material there. That's probably the best resource.
Awesome. So yeah, you obviously had this very profound experience with PQ, more like in your own life, and then what's been the journey of you're obviously teaching other people about PQ as well, like what happened in the interim.
Yes, what I always try things out on myself, no matter what it is. I go into the program or the methodology myself, and then if that works, then I start using it with my clients. And so I started PQ around 2021. It was the tail end of COVID, I guess. And so basically, it's the idea of going to a mental fitness gym. Just like you don't go and run a marathon, you build up to it. It's the same with mental fitness. You don't go and push that really heavy emotional weight, but you start lifting smaller weights. So then when the big one comes, hopefully you recover sooner. And it's the simple idea that we have two sides of the brain. One side that is hypervigilant and looks at the negative and the danger in life, when is also highly critical of self and others. And then there's the other side of your brain where emotions like empathy, creativity sit. And the mental fitness gym simply trains that side of the brain. And if you go to the website, there's plenty of studies with MRIs or also heart rate studies that show how PQ reps make that side of your brain stronger. So you go to it more easily, more automatically, quote unquote, and it also slows down your heart rate. Now, when I use it with clients, I put them into the 6-week program, which is app-based. It helps me to not have to spend time on explaining things or taking them through exercises. And as they progress through the program, we then develop this common language that I can use in coaching. Things like, if something bad happens to you, I can say, what's the gift and opportunity here? Whereas if I would say that to somebody who hasn't done PQ, they would be like, well, there's no gift and opportunity. Something really bad happened. So it's that idea of both strengthening your mental fitness and having a common language that makes it very, very easy to pinpoint what's going on.
So yeah, I really like this term mental fitness versus mental health. But yeah, I was wondering if you could explain, why do you use that term mental fitness versus mental health?
Because it's a parallel of going to the gym. So when you have some chronic disease, you have to deal with that outside of the gym. The gym can help you get stronger, but you might need traditional medical intervention. It's similar with mental fitness. And again, Shirzad Shamin, the founder of the program, he talks about that openly, his own case of depression where he needed to use medication and traditional medical treatment to get to a base level where he could work on his mental fitness. So that's, I think, the difference, that mental health is something that is more profound, whereas mental fitness is something that you can say, well, I might be able to walk around the block, but do I want to run a marathon?
And with your own journey as well, I think the other big challenge outside of the horse riding incident as well was, the breakup of your marriage after such a long time. So yeah, how did PQ help you with that as well?
So there's a concept in PQ where you're really able to have laser focused action. So once you decide to do something, you just go for it. And it's that moment when you go into battle and you don't question that you're in battle. Like you've put yourself into that situation and you're not going to get distracted by any thoughts. And I think that's how I went through my divorce. I think that some of my friends looked at that and said, whoa, 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 slow down here, slow down here. Maybe, you're not ready to make those decisions. Whereas some of my other friends, again, also people in the PQ world, could look at that and say, you're following your gut, you know what's right, and now you're executing on it. And to this day, I know that was the right thing to do. I decided to leave California. I decided to leave my home of 25 years. And literally, I packed 2 suitcases and I went east, and I had no idea where I was going to land. I was also in the PQ Mastery program at that time, which was another profound experience where you take the PQ reps to the next level. You really, really feel them in your body. You do these like 30-minute exercises that are totally visceral. You move through all these experiences of, the judge and the saboteur and so on. And that helped me to manifest that I'm good enough.
Quick break from the show today. Obviously, we're talking about PQ reps, which I think is a great way of dealing with anxiety or anything like that, emotions that are overwhelming us. Another great way is through breathing, meditation. Meditation is a word that freaks people out. So that's why I also use the word breathing. And I know there's forms of meditation that do not just come from focusing on breathing. So I'm not trying to simplify meditation here, but I think our breath is the most powerful thing we have. It literally is the source of our life and our spirit. And there's some very simple techniques that you can do to help you with that. And I discussed this on episode 38 with my colleague Tom Jenkins, who helps produce this podcast as well. So you can also download that episode and listen to it. Or if you're feeling bored of this one already, maybe check that one out instead. One of the things you talk about as well is understanding anxiety as a societal norm. So you're kind of talking about, our brain still lives in the village, where you need to be hyper vigilant, hyper achieving. I kind of interpreted this. I always think of, when we were hunter gatherers, right? We had to have a lot of these emotions like fear, right? Like fear of snakes as an example, right? And we were living more, in nature, and obviously that desire to go and hunt an animal because you need to survive, or you need to feed your family, or whatever it is. But obviously now we live in different circumstances. These emotions aren't as necessary, but they're still there, and we can never get rid of them, right? So this part you wrote around, understanding anxiety as a societal norm. Is that more about the acceptance of these emotions, recognizing them, or can you talk us more about this?
Yeah, definitely acceptance of these emotions. When I look at resilience, resilience is not the absence of fear or anxiety. Resilience is the speed of recovery. And so when we think about, if you weren't vigilant and hyperachieving, if you didn't watch for danger, if you didn't bring the firewood in for the winter, you wouldn't survive. So by definition, we are the descendants of these hypervigilant people. And I mean, we all talk about social media and all these devices and 24/7 news. So back in the days, you didn't have that. So I think who we are today is we are anxious by nature, and then we get these constant feeds of watch out, danger, problems. We also missing, that sense of family and community that you had in the village. So think about, there's the good side of the hypervigilance, but in the village you have the support of the people. You started out with one job, you finished that job, you were like the farrier or the butcher or whatever. And now think about how crazy our life is, but we are wired to be anxious. So I accept anxiety as the norm, and talk about mental health. that's where it starts, that we accept that we're highly anxious by nature. And what do we do? So as I said, for some people that might mean, more medical type intervention, and always thinking about mental fitness and looking at your anxiety or your negative self-talk as something that you can work on, not work against, but work with.
Yeah, like what you said about with the village analogy, that we don't, in terms of dealing with those emotions, which are things we can't get rid of, we have to accept. Yeah, we don't have that community. That's obviously lots of people do still have community, but there are lots of people living in the cities or who don't know their neighbors, living all day on social media, and that community aspect is actually really important for, as you said, your mental fitness. And actually, the last guest we just had on the show, who I think you listened to as well, Trixie, you said she was talking about the blue zones, and actually in the blue zones, it's less about, well, it's still important what they eat, but there's obviously a big effect of like the social atmosphere, and they're very social and they're socializing every day, and that has effects on longevity as well.
Yeah, yeah. And that's certainly the way I grew up. In Europe, that's much more common that you eat together, you go out and meet friends for a meal or drink. I mean, Austria is not a blue zone, but a lot of those lifestyle choices are still there.
Well, yeah, really enjoyed the chat today, Trixie. Wanted to give you just a minute at the end here. Anything you wanted to promote, your courses? I know you're doing this coaching work. Obviously, we'll put a link to your website and your social media. But anything else that you wanted to promote?
I think that's it. I invite anybody to connect with me on LinkedIn. That's where I spend most of my time in terms of social media. And I do run what I call saboteur assessment workshops. I run them about once a month. Actually, I'm going to do one tonight. And that gives people an opportunity to experience the PQ operating system and then opt into doing the 6-week program with me. So that's probably the one thing I would like to share with people in the show. Connect with me on LinkedIn, watch out for my next invitation, and come and join me for a workshop and see what it's all about.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks a lot for sharing your story and your work today, Trixie. It's been fascinating.
Thank you, Mike. I really enjoyed the questions you asked me in the questionnaire, and I really love how you take your guests through the show. So thank you very much.
So from today's episode with Trixie, I'm just going to give you one takeaway, right? Which is, as Trixie said, the PQ reps, we've got information in the show notes, so have a look there. But it's really about using your 5 senses and using your sensations to get out of your head and your thoughts and into your body. So as I was saying, with biting my nails, what I do is actually rub my fingertips together, right? Or I can touch my arm. It can be something super simple, but that's obviously like feeling. It can also be your senses. It can be your eyes. It can be focusing on one thing. But the thing I really recommend is the touch, right? So if you're getting really anxious about something, it can be feeling the surface of the desk, right? Feeling your fingertips. And if you do that just for like 10, 20 seconds, you'll notice you suddenly get more into the sensation of your body and feeling versus into your head, because often we're always too much in our thoughts, and that's what makes us anxious. If you think these PQ reps could be interesting to any of your friends, please share the show with them, and please subscribe to us across podcast platforms and leave a comment or review is always appreciated.